Hey, Rodney, thank you for coming in today. You've done a lot in terms of AI machine learning, and you presented to the White House and the Carter Center, and of course, widely globally. Yeah, you're definitely an expert in so many different areas. So thank you for coming in and sharing your insights with our audience.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen, and really thank you. It's a privilege to be here.
So, Rodney, you've got this wonderful career, and with this tremendous amount of contribution globally in so many different areas. What were those magic moments in your life that led to this wonderful person that you are today, this amazing contributor? And maybe it was something that happened when you were really young. It could be at school, mentors, maybe career inflection points. What are those really defining moments? Maybe two or three of them.
Yeah, thank you, because I do think for me it goes back to moments. I would say first of all, looking at the my family in discussing science and the arts, that was always something that we were deeply involved in around the dinner table. So it wasn't just the science, it wasn't just the arts. There were scientists, clinical scientists, doctors, um, choreographers, artists, and so the idea that somehow I came up in the middle of that. That in other words, if you're going to be creative, make sure you're useful. If you're going to be useful, make sure you're creative. And so that sort of ethos, that sort of get things done but have an impact, happened quite early. There's a there's an ancestor in my family. His name is Dr. John Sappington, and he was part of dinner table conversations here and there as well, but certainly kind of a guiding light in the background. And he really brought quinine to the United States. He self dosed himself. He almost died several times. So he was like a sample size of one. He basically took science and said science was moving in the wrong direction. In this case, clinical science. Malaria was rampant in the United States. So without going into too much detail about John Sappington, he was sort of a spirit that if you're going to do something, make sure you have impact. And he sort of made so much possible in the United States because people were dying much more of malaria and other fevers than they were anything else. And he sort of turned that whole tide, almost like I said, a sample size of one. And he took he took his pills to houses. So he didn't have a distribution network. He didn't have a medical establishment to back him. So I thought about that a lot when I was a kid and when I was growing up. How do you kind of sometimes go alone or go with a small group and move forward in a way that might be counterintuitive, but also very, very impactful. One, you have to have patience, and two, you have to have some sense of persistence and grit. And so that was pretty early on. I would say another one was when I was working in radiology. I'm fasting forward quite a bit. I was working in radiology, and the idea of diagnosing high mortality cancers and cancers that could also be quite prevalent, say breast cancer, both another high mortality cancer, was done by radiologists, and as it should be. The idea though was that there was a lot of misdiagnosis. I saw that. I was right in the background, meaning completely involved in that process. But I also, Steve, really thought strongly that not only were there misdiagnosis, but there were people dying that didn't need to. So that was kind of a huge light bulb that went off. Not because of human intentional error, but human error, misdiagnosis, that really could be, I would say, at least improved by machine learning. And machine learning had not hit medical diagnostics yet, but I saw the peer review, I saw the patients, I saw the radiologist, and I saw the impact of 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 less than desired accuracy. So really, I that's when I kind of put on my creative hat and also put on my technical scientific hat to really think about how we might be able to change that sort of course, and really assist radiologists in these high mortality cancers early when things are curable. You don't want to catch something in late stage. You want to catch something early. So that was percolating. I think that was like you say, one of those magic moments where I said, this has to change. Probably another magic moment was really when I worked with the 9/11 first responders. So I'd helped to establish a cardiac thoracic practice, and that cardiac thoracic practice grew pretty greatly. It was in the tri-state area, and in that practice, there were, of course, a lot of patients that we were pre-screening for lung cancer. But more importantly, I started reaching out to the fire department, the police department in New York City to see what was happening with the people that were on the pile, and what kind of pulverized gypsum, particulate matter. Obviously, there was so many things. It was one of those moments that had never happened before, and people were just running into the cloud. Now, keeping in mind, I'm in a pulmonary thoracic practice, so I'm really thinking strongly about respiratory issues. And lo and behold, I was pretty shocked to find out that a lot of the first responders, I wouldn't say were fully forgotten clinically, but they certainly were not considered in a proactive manner, diagnostically, and really kind of thinking through how cancers may develop early, and to try to catch them at an early stage 1A and B, as it's called in lung cancer. And so I started bringing them into the practice, and they are not very trusting individuals. Firemen, they trust themselves. They are the heroes. Again, as they should be. So they had been through the ringer, basically as clinical test subjects, of course, as patients. There was a lot going on with many of this folks in this population. So to gain their trust, to bring them into practice, to scan them, to work with them, was a huge privilege in my life. And we just had a flood of people and their families coming in. I think probably the greater thing was not only did we catch lung cancer, adenocarcinoma early, but I gained the trust of people like that. That truly thought that we were on a mission. And as again, to bring this phrase up, we were on a mission of impact that was really touching their life. And they saw the consequence of that. I would say another moment when I was at Hopkins. Now, maybe I should talk a little about that educational background, because it is a little, I think it's unusual. I think you find people now in AI that are scrambling to do this. I sort of waded through the waters and tried to cobble together a research education that was meaningful to me. So I was across computer science, biomedical informatics, anthropology, sociology. And why I wanted to sort of cross over those disciplines in academia, it's not so much I wanted to do, I just found myself doing that. Because I was following at that point and doing research on clinical decision making. And to me, it could have been any decision making. I was really, really interested in the behavioral, the cognitive, and to some degree, the neurobiology of decision making that takes place when you start to work with electronic systems. In this case, also algorithms. What kind of decisions get improved, what doesn't? What is that human dimension of interaction between the patient and the doctor, the patient encounter? So that crossed over all those areas quite naturally. It was, I don't wish that on anyone, because you're dealing with 4 departments in terms of academic career, but the knowledge and the experience and the research and the clinics that I worked in and was able to access because of my approach was not an algorithm only approach. It was a deeply human one. Working alongside community health centers, really frontline areas of care was a real kind of high point, an inflection point of what I actually thought were AI, machine learning, full stack software, neural nets, deep learning, really needed to sort of head towards is really don't start upstream. Look downstream at the impact and try to pull upstream and downstream together into problem formulation. So you're formulating the correct problem so that you're actually touching people's lives. And I think many of us in the machine learning and AI space do that. I'm not saying we don't, but I'm saying that's kind of what I emerged out of. That's sort of the petri dish of education and research and experience with people that that really has helped to form my career, who I am, and also where I'm going. So maybe I'll take a pause there.
So that's kind of fascinating. So you've indicated that you came from a really sort of enriched environment when you were growing up, where you were exposed to a variety of different career paths and people from all sorts of different backgrounds, which would then make you very sort of diverse in your thinking. And you were incentivized to think about things like creativity, but making sure it's useful and it has impact. And that led you to think about radiology and the application of AI and machine learning into that, and how you can get better outcomes, and in cancer, how you can get better outcomes by applying some of these multidisciplinary areas. And your educational background is multidisciplinary as well, interdisciplinary, which again gives you this very diverse capability of the convergence of these different areas to solve problems. And you encountered big challenges in the U.S., for example. You talk about 9/11 and being involved and all of the insights that you gained and gaining trust, but also again having impact, doing care that would have profound contributions to the greater sort of society, and that work is now continuing. So it's really quite interesting. And then you even talked about one of your family members and how they sort of became a conduit for solving the malaria situation in the U.S. and through pioneering efforts and being courageous and really breaking frontiers in essence, right? So. And you're carrying on that tradition. I see that you're carrying on that tradition.
Yeah, thank you. I think I never saw it as a tradition, and I will say I'm bringing you into the dinner table conversation, and and I hope the audience feels the same, because those formative moments can happen young, they can happen old, they can happen mid-career, they can happen anytime in your life. I think also, to be honest, that was also very confusing.
Yeah.
Because in going through one's education and all the benchmarks of education and degrees and certification, all that, it's not made like the dinner table that I grew up with. So the idea of navigating that both takes time and a certain kind of persistence, and I think that I grew into over a very long. I have to say, I still am quite struck by the knowledge silos as well as the data silos that we experience in AI and machine learning. Now, of course, there's proprietary issues. There's a lot of things around that, but I'm just saying that as much as the silo breaking kind of background that I have, it's not easy to maintain and also to keep that moving forward in the given kind of specialization, IP, foundational aspects of our private companies. So I think it's necessary to break those silos. That's for sure. I want that to be clear. But at the same time, it doesn't come without a certain kind of energy and cost.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that in terms of all the work that you do, and I've seen that at the Terrasec Institute for Biomedical Innovation. I'm on their leadership board, and we just came from a major summit here in March, and we had one of the co-founders of Moderna, and the gentleman's career is one about breaking barriers and having pushback as well, because anytime you're doing pioneering work, then you're getting pushback and things like that. So I can see elements of that, no doubt, in all the things that you've done. Now let's go up to the present. You're
Sure.
working with AI-driven nanomaterial advanced manufacturing for aerospace and hypersonic space related geographic gravity testing, composites, and so on. Can you talk about that work? Well, I mean, my audience may not know what that means. So can you describe what that means?
Oh yeah, I would love to. So first of all, nanomaterials, the nanoscale of material, or I should say nanoscale of material development, is one that's been around for decades. And what that really means is that when you're working on the nano level, you're working on the quantum level, and you're working atomically. And in working atomically, you're able to build, I'll call them little machines. I know that sounds a little obtuse to everyone, but little machines, you're able to build structures that have binding characteristics, for example, surface areas that you can add and change things to. And so I was working in one of those areas of building nanostructures in boron nitride nanotubes. It's boron and nitride. You hear a lot about carbon nanotubes, and they actually are tubes that built of atoms. And if I was to bring up a screen, you would see that. And one of the interesting aspects of nanotubes in general, but boron nitride, is that they have an incredible thermal capability. That means they don't burn up. So when you talk about aerospace, aerospace is becoming more tourist-based. It's becoming more reusable. And these ideas of usability, you want something that can go up and down and through the atmosphere several times and not burn up. And so when you add carbon nanotubes and of course boron nitride nanotubes, even more so, what you're not getting that ablation. You're not getting that tearing away of materials. And so things, as well as astronauts, they live longer. They end up living. There's no damage, one to the spacecraft craft or any kind of compromise, period. So people are very safely transported. So that's one. Another area that I think is super exciting, Steve, is the area of targeted therapies. Boron nitride is non-cytotoxic. And I'm going to get to the AI in just a moment, but I wanted to tell you that I'm excited about the materials. So the materials have this incredible, you might say, a bit like my background, a little bit of this kind of cross application aspect. It applies to many more applications than one. So targeted therapies is one in oncology and solid tumors. Like I mentioned, aerospace, thermal fluids. You can add boron nitride to thermal fluids, and suddenly in the large server farms that we see continuing to populate our world, you can cool with less. That's huge. If you can gain a 5% cooling, higher performance, I am sure you're aware of this, what that can actually mean. So in thermal, in structural, in therapeutics, you can't build these top down. You have to build these atoms up. And so what I found was kind of impressive and scary is that material science was way behind in materials discovery and using algorithms for design of experiments, although that's been done for quite some time, but to really automate that, to automate the characterization. And what I mean by characterization, being able to look at these atomic structures and be able to really look at them in a way like you look at lung cancer. You can really drill right into the atomic level and see what the impurities and the structural imperfections are. And so to be able to characterize allows you then to go back and improve. So it's algorithms are all over that. It's in terms of advanced manufacturing to improve the synthesis process. Synthesis in this case is a manufacturing process. It's a high pressure process in my case. And you're in these chambers, and these chambers are heated with plasma. And so they're very hot and very high pressure. And you're adding precursor materials, you're adding other materials, and you'll call it the magic starts to happen in that chamber. But you have to know what's going on. And so AI is super helpful in helping to identify, to characterize, and to improve in a process control fashion, that magic moment, I'll call it, of producing the materials, but also post-processing. So we have a long ways to go. And I actually thought when I came into nano, when I started exploring it, Steve, that all this had been figured out. And what I discovered is that it's still a very manual operator process, for the most part. I'm not going to say 100%. So I got really excited that we could actually lend AI to that process and get better results, higher performance materials, and materials that could scale. And so one more piece, and I don't want to bore you or our audience on nanomaterials per se in the production, but I do want to say that to produce these materials at scale and quality is one of the two areas that the world needs to see more of. At a gram level, they've been produced in the lab and industry, but to go to kilogram and ton level consistently in quality, then we have game changers in the world. We can create whole sections of satellites. We can create, it's just a super, that's where AI can be very helpful.
So I see, now I can see why you talk about AI-driven nanomaterial advanced manufacturing, and the applications are universal. It could be in medical applications, but aerospace, as you mentioned, hypersonic, because you get these temperature resistance or the stability, I guess, of these materials. And then space-related geogravity testing and thermal fluid applications that you talked about. But AI can help in the advance and the scaling of the production of these materials so they can be used. So I can see why you're interested, but how when you entered the field that it was quite immature and you try to produce some maturity into this area, right? So how are you doing then? Are you able to scale now, or are you in the process of still learning to scale this thing so you can produce tons of this material?
It's a learning process. Do we know how to scale? Yes. Is it a learning process? And let me underscore learning. Learning is, in this case, when you scale in nanomaterials, properties change.
Right.
So it's not just more of that. Do that times 5. Right. You'll get that bigger times 5. So we're learning how to control for property change, for structural change. Excuse me. Many of the fundamental properties remain, but you can have structural kind of lack of integrity, structural lack of integrity. You can have impurities that sort of creep in that were not there at the smaller scale. You can have longer tubes, shorter tubes. It's called aspect ratio. So you want to be able to have consistent lengths of tubes, the consistent integrity of those tubes, wall thickness, and these kinds of things. It sounds like we're building a car almost, Right. But in the sense that when you get on the nanoscale, you really are building the walls. You really want to know what that length of that tube, we'll call this, in this case, is kind of vehicle, because it can be in therapeutics. It can be a little Uber that delivers to the targeted area. So you really want to design that and have it consistently designed as you scale it up. And so that's still a work in progress. But without AI, I think that's nearly impossible. So we're at a new age.
I mean, I could see some confluence with the work that's being done in quantum computing as well, or quantum
Absolutely.
Science and technology. I know there's a research group in India working on pristine graphene, so room temperature, quantum sort of phenomenon where they can get superposition, and they're working on entanglement at room temperature by using pristine graphene for this. And then there's Philip Wong at Stanford. He's a chip expert, and they're already producing carbon nanotube. They're able to produce chips using carbon nanotubes. So, but he's really working with novel materials as well. And because the semiconductor industry is looking at novel materials, and the the impact it could have. But you're looking at a much broader applications than these kind of narrow applications. But do you talk to the quantum folks at all, or you talk to the semiconductor folks in your work you're doing?
Yes, in fact, after our call, I'm talking to one of the, I'll say, only investors, seed funding investors in quantum. I'm in constant contact on the quantum area, quantum computing, but quantum applications side. Um, it's I'm really looking for how quantum can supercharge the synthesis and scaling process.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not quite there yet. But do I think quantum will be a core technology? Yes. I'd say we're a few years out.
I mean, I can even see applications between what you're doing and I'm thinking Clarice Aiello at UCLA in quantum biology, right? So, and some of the work that you're doing, and it's interesting. Philip Wong is actually looking at also inserting novel materials into cells, but are semiconductors as well, so they can alter the behavior of cells and even do drug delivery. I could see so many
Oh my
different
goodness.
areas that you could partner with, and you're working in pharma as well, right? Pharma, or you have
Correct.
a background working in the pharmaceutical. So, are you talking to the big pharma folks as well on the work that you're doing?
Yes, I am. I'm talking to them and trying to find out where, in a way, their appetite is for R&D in this area, because it is an R&D project or
Okay.
projects. And so, a lot of that work has been in the area of mRNA, and they're really, I would say, reluctant to do anything right now. I'm not saying that across the board, but some semi-reluctant unless it can accelerate and make more efficient the clinical trial, getting to human trials. So everything right now, I wouldn't say everything, that sounds wrong, but a lot of priorities in pharma is how do we shorten the time frame, make less costly, and drive our clinical trials more to orphan drugs and smaller. It's not the big bang or the big capital approach. So can you help us get there, Rodney? Is kind of been the conversation. So I'm working right now on the pharma side, one on exploring the material side, but also on the atomistic simulation side. So one of my lessons out of materials, nanomaterials specifically, is how do we control atom by atom? And so atomistic simulation, there are some solvable and some still to be solved areas of being able to control atom by atom. So we can get high dimensional time series related accuracy. So some of the work in transformers has been helpful. And so I'm working on a project right now to try to kind of push that further to see if we can actually get the compute is arriving. I would say the compute is there or almost there, because it's a high compute problem as well. But we're working on this. Go ahead.
So, are you working with people like Travis Hummel at the Oak Ridge National Laboratories? I mean, because he's working with the exascale supercomputers they have, same as Jack Dongarra. In fact, Jack won the Turing Award for his work in supercomputing, but now they're exascale, and they're combining that with some of the work that they're doing in quantum as well, because you need compute, right? So have you talked to those folks at all? Or are you working with some of the national laboratories because they're combining these hybrid environments and they're doing AI too, right? So they're combining AI within this area and to help drive some of the work that you're doing.
I would love to get back in touch with them. I was in touch with Oak Ridge about a year and a half ago, but
Right.
that's before I sort of made this transition to kind of where I'm headed now. So that's a great suggestion. It's a great suggestion. No, I'm working with a team of physicists, machine learning researchers that come out of Caltech. And so we're really solving that physics problem right now. and working with NVIDIA to get us at least to that measurement and that POC that we need. But to have more compute and to have that kind of infrastructure would be a dream. So thank you. Yes.
On the NVIDIA folks, are you talking to Keith Streer, who heads up their AI program globally, or some other folks within NVIDIA?
My partner has reached out to him. I'm not sure kind of what the status is. This is all very recent, though.
Oh,
just so you know.
Right.
We're cooking the egg as we speak.
Yeah.
We've been working on the problem though for about a year, but in terms of resourcing it and connecting all the dots, we're still doing that.
Yeah, I mean, I find your work really fascinating. This sort of whole novel material area and composites and extreme environments, and you're also into pre-ceramics and 3D printing capabilities and zero gravity. I mean, it's just really, really fascinating. Let's talk about just for a moment. You talked earlier how you're applying your machine learning AI background into diagnostics, right? Image classification. You can use this in tumors, but you could use this in COVID as well before, right? So,
right.
And you've got some work in that area, right? You did work in the cancer detection using AI machine learning combined with the results of the different kinds of equipment that they have, right? Like MRIs or CT scans or even X-rays, but you also led some COVID image classification. Can you talk about some of that work earlier?
Sure. So the work that I did at Analytic, I should say also obviously the team, is that was really, we were certainly one of the first, and so there was not a book written on this. We were really looking at how do we actually segment using the National Lung Screening Cancer public database and a few others. Very partial data, very sparse. And some of that was annotated, but some of it was. So how do we work with a data set that is so inconsistent? That was one of our first challenges. And then I'll go into a few challenges and some of the successes. And then another challenge was really to assemble an annotation team of radiologists that could actually have some level of agreement. As you know, there is no such thing. So the radiologists can tend to disagree, but they generally do converge, and that's what peer review is all about. So that went quite well. It took some time. But I'd say the third thing that was really important is how do we get that, that AUC score, get that true accuracy without overfitting or underfitting. And so that was both, there's a strong radiologist human component. There was a very strong validation component on our side. But I would say something that very, very curiously is that what we did is the team, now we had one radiologist on board. So you're looking at a lot of engineers looking at adenocarcinoma and trying to figuring out what a calcified and non-calcified nodule is. And so I think that one of the parts of that I'd like to share with you and your audience is that learning curve when you're taking on a new domain is sharp and is incredibly important to get rid of bias, or at least as much as possible, but also to gain real results that have traction with patients. So what we did there is once we got consistent accuracy in adenocarcinoma, we then realized that this had to get embedded in a workflow. Because if you give someone that is going through how can I say, a stack of 300 slides, 300 images and a chest CT, how do you want to slow them down to click on another click? So we had to really look at the workflow, and I'd say the workflow was as big of a challenge as the actual machine learning. again, it kind of goes back a little bit to my background. Look at what you're impacting. You're impacting a radiologist's decision making. And that is not an algorithmic problem. That's a workflow problem. And how can you improve that person's level of stress, their cognitive and perceptual accuracy, without sort of, without it all slowing them down because they have a really busy day. So I learned those things of that. It's one thing to work on the engineering level, and really gain really good AUC scores on computer vision of medical imaging. But on the other hand, what does it touch, who does it touch, and how does it touch in the workflow sense? And I think Analytic continues to work on that problem quite a few years after. On COVID, COVID was interesting. It was early on, Steve. We had, and I don't know how this came to us, but our team got a hold of the Wuhan data and chest CTs. And so we were able then to take a look at those against other CTs, a very small databases. We're talking databases that maybe had 20 scans. And some of those scans were pneumonia. So one of the problems with some of those high-risk patients at the time is the pleural effusions, just the water, and scars and other pulmonary illnesses that accompanied the fact that they had COVID. So how do you find COVID in a sea of all of that vascularity and scarification and other problems? So we set out to do that, and I can't tell you all the details on the how. That might take a lot longer, but the team, we did work. We started working off the shelf with ResNets, and other models. And I would say one of the tests of the project was the time we had to do model discovery, the time we had to do data engineering of those different sparse data sets. I think we had 5 different data sets, including the Wuhan. That work was really satisfying because it allowed us to begin to predict how to triage patients that would be at risk. But more importantly, it allowed us to really get very good accuracy because there was a lot of at the time, and even going forward, a lot of misdiagnosis on COVID. And so we were able to get good accuracy on COVID identification and diagnosis. And then we got to the level of having predictive power to triage patients. Now, that did not go through FDA clearance at this point, but we were really excited the progress we made. So it's one to diagnose, but it's two to how do you take them through the treatment regime, or at least get them started on the right track. And I think during COVID, there was no time to make decisions sometimes. Someone was already in the ICU 24 hours after being diagnosed. So it was a very urgent problem we were trying to solve, not just for ourselves, but for any other emergency department that would be using such a technology.
It's an interesting area. Did you work with Alex Wong at the University of Waterloo? They created a model, then they open sourced it. And I think there's probably maybe a couple 100,000 researchers now using it, something like that. So, and because of the scarcity of the data, they were doing generative AI as well for synthetic data, I believe anyways, but and they donated all of this work. So there's a company called Darwin AI, which is
yes,
AI.
yes.
Yeah, but they were donating that part. That was kind of like their give back to humanity aspect. Have you worked with those guys at all? Or
I know about them. I don't think they were. We might have been working in parallel when we did this. I'm not sure. I don't know the date of Alex's work, but we started to learn about this work kind of post work. Super important work.
right. And I understand this aspect of radiology and workflow because I spoke at a South by Southwest, and it was about advances in medicine and how it's going to be transformed using interesting technology, of which AI machine learning. But my impression from and I was on a it was a two-person panel, just myself and a doctor, right? And it was an hour or an hour and a half or something like that. And what was really fascinating is I got this impression that there was kind of like pushback from radiologists
Yes,
on
exactly.
this, right? Is there acceptance now at all, or is there still? It's not really accepted, right, by the colleges, is it? But they're certifying bodies or things like that.
I don't think it's like a one. It's not a binary. It's not accepted or not. There's a lot of gray here. So
Yes, right.
I'll give you like a quick story. It takes like 10 seconds. So I was at RSNA, and this I literally had our visualizations of deep learning in adenocarcinoma on my cell phone. That's how early it was. Okay. And I was showing it around, and people knew me quite well in the community, certainly at that time. And they're like, Rodney, look, I trust you, but I mean, come on, man. This is not a radiologist. And later I showed another radiologist, a very, very prominent name, no name names. And he literally threw me up against the wall and said, you're not taking my job. So it was a pretty emotional conference for me. 2 years later, AI was basically the theme of RSNA. I mean, it certainly was one of the sub themes. It was a big, lots of talk. So I think there is acceptance. There continues to be fear, and there continues to be disruption to their workflow.
Right.
So because there's still a lot of research and development. So I think, one of the great experiences I've had is I've been able to work really closely with radiologists. So they are seeing what I'm seeing. They are designing things in a way that the team is designing. So there's trust that's built over time. But I think that radiologists, they come out of a CAD environment.
Yeah.
They've seen CAD left and right, and they just push the button when they need it, and mostly they don't trust it, So that's the environment in 2013. It was like, we've seen this before. We've seen CAD, but it was fundamentally different, Steve. And so I think you're seeing a lot of acceptance, but I think it's generally a generational one.
Yeah, I mean, I know initially on the diagnostic side in AI machine learning, it was, it's more the high resolution area, like MRIs or PET scans and so on, right? And CTs, but then it started getting into X-rays as well, where you could actually,
Correct.
and that really democratizes it, right?
Absolutely. No, X-rays is really the key, because
Right.
with X-rays, it's high throughput,
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there's been enormous progress. There'll continue to be, but I think the radiologist always wants to be the final decider, in a sense, the final, the one that signs the report.
Yeah, but they're under such workload pressure that it's just too much. All of this can simplify things, combined with a back end, so the business side for them, right? And the combination of the two would reduce their stress so much, right? So, anyways, I guess that's a topic for another discussion too. But anyways,
Yeah. I'll just say one more thing about that. It's about productivity.
right.
Efficiency is not necessarily efficacy here in the world of diagnostics. So sometimes, the error rate, kind of post-diagnosis error rate, it can be quite large. It's like when you go back and see something, you see it, right? And so I think radiologists want to have the latitude to, one, go back, two, have the final say, sign that report, and basically be a collaborator and not be run over by a business-driven algorithm. It sounds like if you know what I mean. So I think those are all in play today, but it's not just radiology. I think those are concerns that you see in the ethical discussions of generative AI. People don't want to be run over, but they also want to use the technology.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about different aspects of things that you've done. So we talked about the nanomaterial work, the pharmaceutical kind of work that you've done, your earlier work with on the radiology side, and high dimensional data and dealing with AI and machine learning. So we covered a spectrum of some of the work that you've done in the past and what you continue to do, and especially in the nanomaterial, which is driving your interest now. What's your predictions then in the marketplace? Like, what do you think are the new breaking trends for 2025 in the nanomaterial space and the AI space? Do you think this generative or large foundation models? So let's use that term because it's a better term. Large foundation models. Do you think they're going to sort of take over in many aspects? And then on the novel material side, where do you see that going? And nanomaterial side by 2025. Put your predictive hat on because you're in the middle of all of this, so you'd have a good idea.
Yeah, so I think you touched on one. I think quantum, if quantum can be integrated in terms of the speed to compute to help decision making in drug discovery and material discovery, I think that's an area of a lot of interest, but I think also a lot of really tangible commercialization going forward. You said 2025, so I think that's kind of a good sweet spot. I would say that in material science, I see, and that this is where I'm heading, is really towards water purification, desalinization, reuse. That's a big area that, in other words, anything that touches water, whether it's pollution or drinking or us or humans or animals, I think water is super important. Go ahead, Steve.
Oh, that's fascinating. So, any other sort of not without any boundaries now predictions you want to make for 2025? So outside of sort of machine learning and computational aspects, we talked about quantum computing, even exascale. I think we're going to hit zettascale by which is 1 trillion billion operations per second by 2025 because that's moving so quickly.
Yes. Yes.
And I know that Honeywell with their Quantinuum, that sort of company they started with Cambridge Quantum, they merged Honeywell Quantum, and Tony Utley is the president of that. He talked about in an interview I did recently that they believe they're going to have a breakthrough on the condensed matter side using their quantum system. And I thought what's really fascinating is they're working on their current generation, next generation, and the third generation all at the same time. And he indicated their third generation, which they have already built, and the second generation, which they're already built, and their first generation, of course, which is widely used, that the third generation is 1 trillion times better than the first generation. And within its life cycle, and he's saying within the next 3 to 5 years, all of these things will come to fore. And he indicated a condensed matter breakthrough this year using quantum computing, but that means superfluids, right? Semiconductors,
Right.
Superconductors, things like that. So, so if you remove, sort of like the boundaries of what we're talking about, what are some other trends that you want to identify by 2025? Because you're or interdisciplinary, so you'd have a good feel. Well, what's
Oh
up?
my goodness. Positive or negative?
Yeah, either, either. Yeah.
Well, I want to say perhaps sadly, I don't see a change yet, except in like communities like this we're talking about in terms of demographic splits, socioeconomic, kind of separation. That's why, or not why, but that's one of the dimensions of water. Water itself is becoming commoditized and becoming scarce, both because of climate, but also because of commercial reasons and state-based reasons. So that's one. I hope that the communities that we form, with whether it's with tech or deep tech or just our grit and persistence, that we can heal some of those, because the planet to me is kind of the central future. And that central future is really where we should all focus. It's certainly where I'm focusing. And so I think that you're going to see trend-wise an explosion in planet-based, climate-based, environmental-based solutions that might be super low tech, you know, but that the planet becomes no longer something that we think about as sustainable. As we don't think about sustainability, we think about survivability. That switch in people's minds is happening, and I see that as a super positive trend. And I also think that if we go from sustainability to survivability, that starts to heal those separations that I mentioned, you know, the socioeconomic. We have a common goal, a common life, a common thing that we're saving. And I hope, and I am very focused in this area, Steve, that people can settle on the planet as a good focus for their careers, their life, and their families.
Yeah, so don't get hung up on the terms, right? And then which leads to polarization.
Exactly. Don't get hung up with the terms. Yep. Yeah. Just, you know, people have different angles on this. And also, and also too, you know, you may be in an area of expertise that ends up being totally irrelevant. And so you need to relearn, you know? I think quantum is the idea of being relevant with quantum itself is, you know, that is itself is a challenge. But the idea is that the planet should always stay central and relevant to us, particularly today.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the foundation and the bedrock for all of us, right?
I know, but we forget that. Do we not?
Yeah, exactly. So this is the last question, and this question is, what recommendations would you want to give to the audience? And my audience is really broad, by the way. I get a lot of CEOs and board members, but I also get scientists and engineers and students. So it's a really broad audience.
Yes. Um, okay, so let me start with like students, PhDs, postdocs, those folks that I'll be on a project or trying to find a project. I think sciences today are an entrepreneurial activity, not strictly, but often. So be useful, but be meaningful. I mentioned planet. I mean, that's my passion. But it comes out of a lot of experience to get there. I think you can start earlier, and don't think that you won't be starting a company, because you probably will. So, you know, we're often trained, you know, as scientists in areas that are, you know, scientific, and to solve a scientific problem, and that should never go away. That should only be enhanced. But at the same time, we solve problems in certain organizations, and so the entrepreneurs should be brought in. So think that way. I'd say for our CEOs and board members, leaders, I would really look to, you know, social impact as having the key driver of your company over the next 5 to 10 years. That it's not just about looking good and having a nice brand, but it's actually showing that impact can be measured and that you're behind that on a societal, social level, and you can define that in different ways. So I think those are kinds of the things that I think that are super important. Learn early to integrate and be cross-disciplinary with a meaningful project that you can leave behind and be proud of. And then from a business leader standpoint, having social impact is no longer a branding problem. It's a planetary one.
So Rodney, I mean, thank you for coming in today. Great advice to the audience, and it's segmented as well, depending on you know, which sort of your frame of reference is. And you brought so much to the discussion. You got over 2 decades of scientific and technical experience. You've done work in AI, machine learning, and novel materials, and the pharmaceutical industry, and drug discovery, advanced manufacturing, development of early algorithms and diagnostic systems, deep learning, to cancer. I mean, and that sort of aspect of nanotechnology, clinical research, healthcare, pharma, and so much more. It's just an amazing career, and it continues to thrive. So thank you for coming in and sharing so much with our audience.
Thank you, Steve. Again, very much a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.